Welcome to Flipped Classroom. We are looking at programming basics, and today is Python's strings. Our learning intention is we are learning about how to manipulate strings in Python, and our success criteria is I am successful when I can know what strings are, manipulate strings, and format strings. So in Python, strings are a primitive variable type, and we talked about this in the previous video. And they are a collection of characters that are listed one after the other. Now, to declare a string, you can use either single quotation marks or the double quotation marks. It is best practice for you to use the same quotes throughout your program. So if your program starts using single quotes, you stick with single quotes for the program. If you start with double quotes, you stick with double quotes for your whole program. There are cases where you might want to mix and match, but in most cases it's best to keep the same quoting system throughout the whole program for your strings. Now, concatenation is when we join two or more strings together. So we can do this in Python by just using the addition symbol or the plus symbol. And it doesn't matter if you create a string using a single or a double quote, or it was inputted by the user. We can have those mixed strings put together and concatenate them or join them together. But as I said before, it's best practice to try to keep the same quotes throughout your program. So here's an example. I've got the first string plus the second string, and I'm assigning it to a third string. Or I can have a string and I can add some constant string where I've added a word or something like that, and then assign that to another string as well. So let's have a look at that in PyCharm now. So here we are in PyCharm with our code for concatenation to see how it works. So we've got two strings here, hello and world, and our challenge here is to join them together to say hello and world with a space in between. I can type in here the two variables, and when I run this, I'll notice that there is no space in between those two words. So I need to put in between a space. So we've got the hello variable, a constant here of a space, and then the world variable. And when I press play, I can see it's now got the space in between. So I will check that, and it'll tell me that is all okay. And I can see that it is done, and so I can move on to my next one. Now let's go back to our notes. So let's have a look at multiplication. So we can actually duplicate a string multiple times by just using the multiplication symbol. And this is as simple as just typing in what you want to multiply it by. So an example here, multiplied string equals whatever string we want times 5. So my example here, I've just got a string called string and I'm multiplying it by 5. And you can see that the new multiplied string is just the word string 5 times one after the other. Because there's no space in that first string, there'll be no space in that second string either. Now let's go into PyCharm and have a look at how that is done in PyCharm. So here I have the string multiplication codes, and I've got a variable called hello this time, and I want 10 of hellos, and I just need to put in an operator here. Now we know that we can use the multiplication operator here, so that it will take the variable hello and multiply it by 10 times and put that into this variable here. So now I'll hit play and I can see that hello is repeated 10 times there, and I'll check my code, and again it has told me that it's all correct and I can move on to my next one. Let's go back to our notes to look at some string indexing. Indexing is really useful in Python because it allows us to look at different parts of a string. So we can find out a specific value of a character in a string. And this is because strings are actually a type of array, and we'll be looking at that in later videos. Now this is done by having the variable name and then using some square brackets, and in those square brackets we will put an integer, which is a whole number, to state where I want to look. So that's called the index. Now with Python, the very first character of your string is indexed at 0. So character number 1 is actually the second character. Here's an example. I've got the word hello as a string. If I go greeting square bracket 1 square bracket, that gives out the letter E. And you can see the table at the side where I've got the numbers across the top indicating the index, and I've got the letters down the bottom indicating their position. So you can see each position for each number. Now, if we do a number that's bigger than the length of the string, Python will throw an error and crash your program. So you do need to make sure that you are keeping those numbers in that area. We can also do indexing with negative numbers. And we can use the negative numbers to find characters from the end of the string. So I'm going to do the same example from before. I'm going to use hello, but this time you'll notice the numbers in my table are negative. So -1 is the very last character, -2 is the second last, and so on. So if I say greeting -3, it's going to count from the end, the third character, and that's the L, and then it'll return the value L. Now, if the index is actually smaller than that first character, so in this case, my string is 5 characters long, and that first character is -5, Python will throw that error again. So let's have a look at PyCharm and see how we do indexing. Here I have my code for string indexing. I have a variable up here called Python, and it stores the word Python with a capital P. And it's got a print line in here, and it's saying that H plus, and it's getting the third character, but remember the index starts with 0, so it's actually the fourth character in our string, which will be the H there. So I should see H space H in our output. And now it wants me to find the letter P. Now the letter P is the first letter. And remember our indexing starts with a 0. So I'm just going to type in Python, which is my variable, and I want index 0. So it's going to grab that first one. I hit the play button again, and I can see that it's grabbed just that P letter, which is what I wanted. Now I will check it and see if that matches up, and it's all okay. So now I can move on to negative indexing. So with negative indexing, we want the exclamation mark, which is the very last one. I could go through and count how many characters there is in the string, but the easy way is a negative index. So I'm going to type in there the long string that I've got, and I'm just going to go -1, and that's going to find that last character. Remember, it starts at -1 here, and we can minus backwards through that string. So let's hit our play, and it's worked fine. It found that exclamation mark that I wanted, and I can hit check, and it says it's all okay. Now let's go back to our notes and look at substrings and string slicing. Let's look at slicing up strings. Now we can get Python to give us multiple characters from a string, and this is called a substring. And we use similar notation to indexing, but this time we have 2 indices, and we separate it by a colon to say where we want it to start and where we want it to end. I'm going to give you some examples here. Now we're going to use str as my variable. So I've got str square bracket start colon end. So it's going to select all of the characters from the start to the end -1. And it's doing this because remember the start character is 0. So it takes 1 off that position. Now we can do a couple of other tricks as well. We can go str start with the just colon and no number for the end. And what that does is it takes it from our start number that we give and goes all the way to the end of the string. And likewise, we can do the reverse. We can go colon end, and it'll start at the start and finish wherever you say that end number is going to be. The last one is just str colon, and that just copies the whole string or returns the whole string. Normally you would just write str without the square brackets. Let's go over to PyCharm now and have a look at how that's done. So here we are looking at string slicing or looking at substrings. So we remember we put in 2 indices with a colon in between to work out which characters I want. So this first string, we've got Monty Python up here, and it's got the word Monty with a space and then Python. Now this first one just wanted Monty, which was the first 5 characters. And remember, indexing starts at 0. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's cut off the 5th character. So we want Python which is starting at number 6 and going to the end. Now we can use this second example to help us. In my text here, I'm going to type in Monty Python, and I'm going to start at index number 6, and I want to go all the way to the end. I could count this to work out how long it is, but if I just put the colon there, it'll just go to the end. Now let's test our program. It's come out okay. If I miscounted and I did 5, it would have added in that space. But I just wanted the word Python, so I started at 6. Let's check our answers, and it's come out correctly. So let's go back to our notes and look at some operators. Now, sometimes we want to know things about our string. So one thing that we can do is we can see if a string contains another string. So this is using a operator called in. Now we've done operators before with equals and greater than and less than. The in operator allows us to see if a word is inside that word. So I've got the example here where it's asking, is the word world in the string hello world? And this will return a true. Now, if the characters were different case, so if that W was lowercase, it'd return false because it wouldn't match up. It has to be exactly the same case for both strings. Now, we can also check the length of a string, and we can use a function called len, and that's just shortened for length. So if I put the text len, open bracket, and the string that I want to look at, or the variable I want to look at, it will return the number of characters in that string. So using the example from before, the word hello, it will return the number 5 because there's 5 characters in that string. Now, this is actually really useful if we are doing indexing from before, because that way we can check before we index to make sure that the string will work. Let's go over to PyCharm now and see how this works. Here we are again. We're looking at the in operator. So we're checking if a word contains another word. So our variable is ice cream, and it contains the characters to form the word ice cream. And the second line here is printing out whether or not the word cream is in that variable ice cream. Now we want to check if the word ice is in the word ice cream. So we're going to do something similar. We're going to put in our quote, and we're going to say ice. We're asking if it's in the variable ice cream. So it's just checking if the word ice is in the variable ice cream. Now let's test it, and it's come out as true, and we knew that was true. Now, if I put in a capital I for that ice, you'll notice it comes out as false because this is case sensitive. So it's very important that if you're doing this, you're making sure that the variable you're looking at and the characters you're looking at are in the same case. Now let's hit check, and it's come back as all okay. Here we are looking at string length. We have a really long string here, and we're using triple quotes, and this triple quotes allows us to do this across multiple lines. So we can just type in the string how we want. So we want the first half of this phrase. To do that, we're going to have to use one of the skills we looked at before, which is the substrings or slicing. And we're going to have to look at the function len, because the function len tells us the length. So in my text here, where I want the first half of that phrase, I'm going to type in phrase, highlight there, and I'll type in phrase because that's the set of characters that I want. And I'm going to open up my indexes, and I'm going to go colon because I want the first half. So it's going to start at the start, and it's going to go up to the length of the phrase, and I'm going to divide that by 2. Now there could be a problem here where if I divide this by 2, it could come out as a floating point number, or it's a decimal. So I'm going to force this to become an integer, just in case something like that happens. So what I'm doing is I'm getting the length of the variable phrase, I'm dividing it in half, I'm then converting it to a whole number, an integer, and then I'm going to get the phrase and go from the 0 to that point. Now let's just test this, and it comes out and it goes through, and I can see that it gets up to about the halfway point there. Let's check our answer to see if that works, and it works fine, so we can move on to character escaping. Let's go back to our notes and have a look at that. Next, we'll look at character escaping. Now, character escaping is really useful because sometimes there are characters we want to use that either aren't on our keyboard or could cause some errors because we've used them as our quotes or apostrophes. So these are special characters that we want in our string, and we use this to inform Python that the next character is actually going to be used as something. So here's some examples. So I can use that backslash character and then a quote, and what that does is it adds a quote into my string. I can do the same with the single quote, and I'll add that into the string. Now, because backslash is a special character, because that's our escape character, if I want to add a backslash into my string, I actually have to put in backslash to add that backslash in. And backslash n actually adds a new line. So if you want a string to go over multiple lines, you can do a backslash n and it'll jump down to the next line. Let's go over to PyCharm now and see how that works. Let's look at character escaping. So it wants us to print out the name of this ice cream is sweet and tasty. So that's the text that it wants us to print out. So I'm just going over into my text here. I'm going to paste that in. Now, if I try running this, it will cause an error. And I can see the error there because it doesn't know what to do with these apostrophes because I used a single apostrophe in this text. So I'm going to use the escape character, which is that backslash before each of those apostrophes. And once we've done that, you can see that it's turned this different color to say it's an escape character. Now let's test it. And you can see that the text in the bottom has come up correctly with the sweet and tasty with the apostrophes in between. Now let's check our answers, and it's told us that it's fine, so we can move on. Let's go back to our notes and have a look at some methods for the strings. Now, methods are just special functions that happen with specific objects. The string object that we've been working with for this video has a bunch of functions that are specific for only it. And we access those functions by typing in the variable name and then putting a full stop and then the function we want to actually operate on for that variable. So here's an example of 3 of them. So if I have my variable and then I write .lower and put the brackets in, it returns that variable in all lowercase. If I do the same type of thing, .upper with the brackets, it will return that string in uppercase. And I can do .capitalize with brackets, and what that does is it lowers the case of all the characters except for the first one, which it makes an uppercase. Let's go over to PyCharm and see how this works. Let's start looking at some string methods. So we have the string, this variable MontyPython has the string MontyPython with a capital M and a capital P and a space. And the second line will print that out. Our fourth line will print that out, but we'll convert it to lowercase characters. Now for our last line, we need to print it in uppercase letters. So we can do this almost exactly the same code as above, but instead of lower, we will use upper. So let's type in here, there's our variable, and we'll use the method upper. And here we have that. Let's test our code. So we'll press run. It comes back with the original string, the lowercase string, and the uppercase string, which is what we were expecting. Let's check our code. It works fine. So we can move on to string formatting. Let's go back to our notes and have a look at that. Finally, for this video, we're going to be looking at formatting strings. Now, formatting strings allows us to write code and insert numbers and variables into the string without having to use any functions like str to convert them into strings. So an example for this is I could use print open bracket str open bracket name close bracket plus, and then keep doing that. Now this can get a little bit tedious, especially if you've got lots of variables this could extend out how long the line is and make it very unreadable. So this can actually be shortened by using the %s to hold a string variable, %d for a number variable. So with my example here, I've got %s is %d years old, and then at the end of my print string, I have one more percentage outside of the quotes, and then I have brackets and the variables that I'm going to be using in that order. So you can see that name will be put in where the %s is, and age is going to be put where the %d is. Now this converts numbers and booleans and stuff into strings for us automatically, so we don't have to actually worry about doing any of those conversions. Okay, let's go over to PyCharm now and see how that's done. So we're going to do some string formatting. Here we have the variable name, and it's got the word John in there, and it will print out hello PyCharm, my name is, and we've got that %s in there as a placeholder for the variable string, and we've got our list of strings here with the variable from above. For the next line, it says I'm special symbol, we need to type that in, years old, and it's got the variable here years. Now I'm going to start off by putting in my special symbol there, and special symbols for numbers is a D, and because I don't have this variable years yet, I'm going to type in a variable. I'm going to type in the variable years, and I'm going to type in, and then I'm going to run it. And let's test it. It's got hello PyCharm, my name is John, because it's used that variable there. I'm 42 years old because it's taken that number 42 and it's placed it into there. Let's check our answers. It's come back as correct. So that finishes everything we need to know about strings. As always, like the video and subscribe for more videos on both Python and mathematics.